Good evening, my name is Laksh Bell. I just came across this video on CNBC. This is June 30th today, so this is a video from yesterday, and this is on CNBC television. And I wanted to take a moment out to basically show you the level of authenticity and journalistic integrity that you can expect from CNBC and other major news outlets. So it's not just Mike Alfred and his ilk that are willing to do whatever it takes to basically bring Celsius down. We have a more complicit power structure that, let's see what they say, and then we're going to talk about what they have been saying. So I'm going to play this video for you and then pause it and talk about it. Let's go.
When your money's in the bank, it's insured by the FDIC up to a limit. In the crypto world, there's not always a guarantee.
First of all, everybody knows that your money is FDIC insured when you put it in a bank. What is not insured is the value or the monetary value of the dollars you hold in your bank account, which is very different for every other hard asset out there, including cryptocurrencies, which tend to fluctuate wildly. So everybody knows that all investment is risky, especially with cryptocurrencies. And we know that there are cycles that go from lows to all-time highs, and then to very disappointing lows again, to new all-time highs, and then very disappointing lows again, to new all-time highs. So what he's saying is that your money is not insured by the FDIC. That is true, but we already knew that going in. So let's keep moving.
The cryptocurrency company Celsius attracted billions in deposits from 1.6 million customers.
See, that's the level of research these guys do. So 1.7 million depositors is not a thing. 1.7 million people downloaded the app, of which over 500,000 were verified users. So you cannot really deposit money onto Celsius until you become a verified user. And that's the kind of research all these big media publications with lots of money actually tend to perform, and that's the kind of effort you can expect them to actually put in before they release a news report or a story or an article.
But now they can't get their money. Here's CNBC's Kate Rooney.
Crypto company Celsius made its name on being the modern alternative to a bank.
We bailed them out. They gave themselves record bonuses.
Customers tell CNBC that CEO Alex Mashinsky was a reason they put faith in the company. He was seen as more transparent than a Wall Street CEO, with weekly YouTube talks, often wearing a t-shirt that reads, "Banks are not your friends."
The only comment I have here is that he was seen as, notice the verbiage, okay? He was seen as being more transparent, as if he's no longer seen as being more transparent. So the presupposition in their linguistics is just amazing.
They say that image was shattered when they heard from Celsius that their accounts would be frozen on June 12th.
So they're going to have 2 or 3 guys up there. Let's see.
Celsius blaming extreme market conditions. One customer we spoke to, George Watson, says he lost a year's worth of rent.
He didn't lose it. If what you're suggesting is, what CNBC is suggesting is that the coins that this George guy had on Celsius are more or less gone, which is absolutely, there's no evidence that the coins that you have or the cryptocurrencies you have or the digital assets you have on Celsius are gone. It's just that you cannot withdraw from Celsius right now. So to use verbiage that suggests that that money is gone or that cryptocurrency is gone or those assets is gone is basically tending to show a heavy bias. It demonstrates to me how heavily CNBC's team is biased.
Now we're all kind of left in the dark. We don't know what's going on. So yeah, it's pretty nerve-wracking.
Alex Mendoza.
It's nerve-wracking. So that's all that guy said. The other stuff about people's trust in Alex Mashinsky being shattered when the withdrawals were halted, you are probably not going to hear that from any of the speakers they bring on there.
Pignon, a single dad and FEMA worker, says his investments were worth $100,000 at one point.
So this guy, first of all, I really feel sad for the people who had most of their money on Celsius or on one asset or one class of asset. It's really just sad when retail investors get in, especially on all-time highs, and they think they have X amount of money when really all they have is paper gains. And that too, most of that is locked up on one exchange or in one class of assets, or so on and so forth. I really feel sad for them. But what is even sadder about this is that I'm a single dad and I'm currently unemployed. So this guy was probably hoping to use most of that money to basically survive his unemployment and take care of his child. That is really sad. However, you have to understand, when you say at one point of time I had $100,000 on there, and the market is down like 80% to 90%, you more or less now have like $10,000 to $20,000 of assets on Celsius network or in your cryptocurrency wallet because the market is down. So it's not the same as I'm not saying it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's something to be condoned. Withdrawal limitations are to be condoned. I'm just saying that at one point of time, if you had $100,000, that does not mean you still also have $100,000, assuming you did not take profits and pay taxes on them.
It's money that was really hard earned, and because we want to get to that point where we have a more financial stable life, we're sometimes willing to take more risk, but it's not worth it.
So from what you saw in that testimony, before we move on, this gentleman understood that there was a lot more risk with cryptocurrencies in general, and he still chose to take that risk. And if CNBC turns around and tells you, or if someone else turns around and tells you that was all the money he had and all of it was gambled away somehow or is locked up somehow, well, I'm going to say it's gambled away, because if you put 100% of your money on anything at all, you're gambling your life away, really. You might make it big, but chances are you won't, because you won't know when to quit, which is what happens with most investors, retail and sophisticated investors both. People don't know when to quit. It's just human nature. When you're winning, you think that this is your lucky streak, you're going to keep going forward, and then you start losing and you're like, oh, this is just a temporary dip. I'm going to recover from this and I'm going to retire on top. Maybe I'll sell when Bitcoin is at $100,000, except it never went there. It went to 69,000 for a day and then it kept falling down, and now it's down to $18,000 at this time. And so if you have all of your money on a platform, that's just really bad financial management. Now, CNBC, the point of this video is CNBC and their, well, let's call it journalistic integrity. CNBC goes out and finds the one guy, if this is true, assuming this is true, who had 100% of his savings on Celsius, who gambled 100% of all his savings on cryptocurrencies. And then they turn around and they tell you, oh, the market conditions are bad. And by the way, they're probably going to run news stories and reports about how Bitcoin wrecked everyone or cryptocurrencies wrecked everyone because, people basically who had their money in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies got wiped out. And the only reason they got wiped out is because they had 100% of their investment portfolio in cryptocurrencies.
Of everyday investors trusted their digital currencies with Celsius.
Again, it's the same old emotional angle. Oh, it's the everyday single mom, single dad, or, a couple of people working really hard, trying to raise a family. These guys, nice people, people you live next door to. And these guys had everything on Celsius, and now their withdrawals are blocked, so they don't have money to eat or whatever. But to be very fair, that is, if you really had 100% of your money, that is really unfortunate on Celsius. But part of that blame goes to you to have 100% of your money in cryptocurrencies, and then even in cryptocurrencies all on CeFi, and even within CeFi all on Celsius network, or on BlockFi, or on Nexo, or on CRO. I mean, you never know what happens to one company, one entity at any given point of time. So if you had that, you just made really bad financial decisions. You never hear any news reports about guys who go out and gamble all their money away every Friday when they receive a paycheck. You never hear anything about them. You only hear about those when you have a targeted attack towards, let's say, cryptocurrencies or cryptocurrency entities in particular.
The appeal, 18% back on your deposits, especially alluring at a time when the average savings account gives you 0.1%.
And that is the whole thing. The average savings account will give you 0.1% back. Celsius will give you 18% or up to 18%, or at least they used to give you up to 18% on certain stable coins and whatnot. And that is why Wall Street and traditional finance cannot have Celsius resurrect itself from this temporary liquidity crisis that they're having. They cannot afford this because they really want the status quo to continue, where they get to make whatever, 10, 20, 30% on your money. Because remember, when you deposit $100 with the bank, they don't just lend out $100. They lend out a lot more because all the money keeps coming back to them, and it's a geometrical progression. I can get into that in another video, but suffice it to say, they're lending out a lot more than you're depositing with them, and they have the ability to print money out of thin air. So when they do that, they make a lot of money. And do they share any of that with you? No, absolutely not. Why should they? And then comes along this guy, Alex Mashinsky, and a small team with a rising upstart called Celsius, and they want to share most of their profits with you, the depositor. And the traditional finance guys just cannot have that. They cannot. Their very way of enslaving and surviving is at risk right now with Celsius. If Celsius survives, and if the likes of Celsius survive, they are never going to enjoy the kind of power, the kind of monopolistic power. You see all these different dozens of banks, and they all have the exact same business model. Okay, so the power that they have is not a duopoly or a triply, it's all a monopoly. It doesn't matter whether you go to Bank of America or Citibank or whoever. It's the exact same thing. They are not going to share their profits with you. They're not going to share their revenues with you. And they cannot have a combatant like Celsius that will actually share revenues with you, which is why you're going to see all these smear campaigns that appeal to the emotional side, the goodness of your heart that says, if I trusted Celsius with all my money, maybe I would want it back too. And these guys are really hurting. True, that is absolutely true. What is also true is that these guys are probably gambling a lot more than they should have.
Celsius is not a bank. Behind the scenes, analysts say that money was lent out to hedge funds or
who are these behind the scenes analysts? Let's see.
Put into other risky crypto investments.
So how do they know they were lent out to hedge funds or put on a risky profile? Basically, if they were being if Celsius lent out your cryptocurrency, that's their business model, but they were always over collateralized. Okay, they always had a collateral that was worth more than the cryptocurrency that you lent out, or the cryptocurrency that they lent out rather. They always had more in collateral collected from the borrowers. And then you're talking about the risky cryptocurrency plays, and there is zero evidence of that. So CNBC will run a story even though they have zero evidence of any risky plays that were undertaken by Celsius Network.
The structure began to crumble as prices collapsed.
So I have said this before, I'll say it again. Every time you have an entity that actually doesn't have the ability to print money like a traditional bank does because of the reserve ratios, and they're trying to generate yield, they have to give out a certain percentage of the depositors' currencies or coins to lenders or to borrowers, right? To third parties who then deposit a collateral with Celsius Network, but who have contracts with Celsius Network. So they're borrowing your cryptocurrencies. So Celsius is giving out your cryptocurrencies in order to generate yield. Now, if they have a small reserve, let's say 20%, okay? I'm not sure if it's 20%, but if they have 20% on hand to handle withdrawals from the depositors, and if more than 20% of those coins are requested to be withdrawn at the same time, Celsius cannot provide that because they simply do not have those coins. Those have been basically issued out, sent out, or lent out in order to generate yield. That's how Celsius's business model works. They're not like a traditional bank where you go and deposit $100 and then they multiply it with a certain number and it's just numbers on screen, and then they can lend out X times $100 because of the reserve ratio. Cryptocurrency is immutable. Blockchain is immutable. So whatever you lend to them or whatever you deposit with them, they take a fraction of that, a large fraction of that, and they have to physically hand out those coins, and that transaction is recorded on the blockchain. So what you have here is a liquidity crisis, not an insolvency crisis, which happens when assets are no longer, total assets held on the balance sheet are no longer more than the liabilities on the balance sheet. In other words, the net equity becomes negative. We have no evidence that that is true, but CNBC still decided to run with the story.
Legal experts say all of this will likely end in bankruptcy.
So legal experts, because they don't have names, and then this will likely end in a bankruptcy. I got a statement with a likely. So this year will likely end up with me being the richest man on the planet. Likely. You can say likely with any statement, and if it doesn't come true, oh, we were never guaranteeing it. We just said it was likely. Likely has no meaning. Likely, you can say likely, and then you can go on to state whatever you want to state. It doesn't matter. It's likely that the building I'm in will collapse the day I move out of it. You can say likely, and then you can go on to basically hypothesize anything. It's basically likely and then fiction, and then that's a news story.
Investors could end up getting pennies on the dollar from their...
Again, investors could, likely. Notice the verbiage. Investors could end up getting pennies on the dollars.
Their original deposits, but even that won't happen overnight. So keep looking at the speculation. What you're looking at here is all speculation. This is not a news report. This is fiction, peppered with the phrases such as experts say, and people familiar with the matter say, insiders familiar with the matter say. It's always these people, nameless and faceless people. And then they use words like could, likely, probably, won't happen.
That's something that would take a while. So Celsius may actually have a fair amount of runway. The only exit door...
Did you notice that? Let me go back and pay attention this time, okay? Let's look at the testimony of this guy.
Take a while. So Celsius may actually have a fair amount of runway. The only exit door would seem...
So we don't even know what CNBC did with the actual testimony that came from this guy, this Georgetown University law professor. You saw that flash, right? That white flash. That was a jump cut. So he was going on. He probably went on to explain in greater detail what that runway meant for Celsius. But CNBC made it sound like Celsius is heading towards a bankruptcy. Okay, we don't know how many minutes long that testimony was. That could have been 20 minutes of content they just snipped out, and they just took the two phrases that made perfect sense for their narrative, stitched them together, and presented them to you as if that's the ultimate truth, even though this is just one man's opinion. And we don't even know how much this Georgetown University law professor really knows, understands, or gets Celsius's business model, let alone having access to actual data that would actually make him suitable enough or qualified enough to arrive at decent conclusions. So regardless of that, they actually cut out most of his testimony. Let me show you again.
From their original deposits, but even that won't happen overnight.
That's something that would take a while. So Celsius may actually have a fair amount of runway. The only exit door would seem to be bankruptcy.
Meanwhile, customers haven't heard an update from Celsius in over a week.
It's just a week. We heard from Zach just a few days ago.
And say it's hard to hold on to optimism.
I still have hopes a little bit, but the hope...
So, these guys, it's hard to hold on to optimism is followed by a testimony that begins with, I still have hope. Like, do you need to show them? Their editors are good, but they're not perfect. Is what I'm saying. When you're lying and constantly lying, you get caught every once in a while. And so she says people are losing optimism. And the very guy whose testimony they're featuring starts with, I still have hope.
Hopes, they keep shrinking the more time that goes by.
I really hope that we can get our funds back, or at least some of the funds back, because, it wouldn't, it would be obviously a big hit to lose that money.
Shep, 5 state regulators we spoke to are now investigating Celsius. Its federal regulator declined to comment. We also reached out to the company, its CEO, and law firm. No response across the board from Celsius.
So you get no response from the federal investigators. That is fine. But you get no response from Celsius Network. That's just newsworthy. What we have here is a bunch of speculation. We saw not one fact throughout this almost 3 minute long video in which they presented reasons why Celsius would be heading towards bankruptcy. Did you see any? Show it to me. Point it out to me. I didn't see any. All I saw was a smear campaign which goes, oh, Celsius is likely heading towards bankruptcy, so you're unlikely to get your money back. And moral of the story, you should have trusted one of those institutions that are backed by the FDIC that basically make so much money on your capital and keep devaluing your capital while giving you 0.1% per annum. and you should be content with that. It's the same exact argument as you shall own nothing and you shall be happy about it. That's all I have for you this evening. My name is Laksh Bell. I hope you learned today not to trust what was formerly an authoritative source of news and information is now just entertainment media. That's it. And even entertainment media with a lot of bias, with a race in the horse. With a horse in the race. That's what you have here. That and nothing else. Have a great evening.